Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And good morning, everyone. So, let me introduce myself. My name is Annisa, and I'm from Class C, English Education 2018. Thank you for the chance. Today, I would like to present my result proposal. This title is Improving Students' Vocabulary Mastery by Using Card Games. The first one is Chapter 1. In Chapter 1, there are introduction, problem identification, research focus, research objective, and research benefits. First is introduction. Vocabulary is one of the basic components that must be mastered. With mastery of vocabulary, students will be easier to produce many sentences, both oral and written. Students can speak English well if their vocabulary is poor. Therefore, vocabulary mastery is the most important thing and must be the first priority in teaching and learning English. Because without mastery vocabulary, students will find it difficult to master language skills. Furthermore, the researcher has some problems. There are two difficulties. First, the students has difficulty in memorizing the vocabulary. Second, the students were just silent or answered the teacher's question by using mother tongue instead of using target language when they answer the question, because the students and the teacher seldom use English in teaching learning process. And based on the reason above, the researcher chose improving students' vocabulary mastery by using card games. And we move to the problem identification. There are two the problem of identification. Number one is, how is the process of improving the students' vocabulary at senior high school number 2 Champalayan. And the second one is, how to use card games to improve students' vocabulary at first grade of senior high school number 2 Champalayan. And we move to research focus. Measuring the extent to which first grade students' understanding of senior high school number 2 Champalayan on vocabulary learning. Next, research objective. Increase students' interest and vocabulary achievement by using card games at senior high school number 2 Champalayan. The last in introduction is research benefits. And there are two the research benefits. The first one is for teachers. For teachers, make it easier for teachers to provide vocabulary learning to students. And for students find it easier to improve, memorize, and understand vocabulary. And students don't feel bored when studying because they learn to use card games. So the second one is Chapter 2, Review of Related Literature. And there are some of the previous findings and theoretical framework, and the last is hypothesis. The first one is some previous findings. There are three, and the first previous study was conducted by S.Pd 2014 to obtain empirical evidence whether card games technique is effective or not in teaching vocabulary. Her research was experimental design, and she found there is significant effect of using card games technique towards students' vocabulary. It was found that the card games are effective and applicable in teaching vocabulary at the 7th grade. The second previous study was conducted by Mila Fredika Fiantina, 2017. This research was used pre-experimental research, and she found out whether there is a significant effect of using card games vocabulary learning achievement of the first-year students. This research is one group pretest post-test design. The results of the data analysis show that the mean score of the pretest and post-test is 62.11 and 74.94. It can be concluded that there is a significant effect of using card games on vocabulary learning achievement of the research students. And the last research was conducted by Nirmala Astuti Uska 2010. The purpose of this research to investigate whether there are significant differences on students' vocabulary mastery between students who are taught by using random card games and how are taught by using conventional ones. The researcher takes all the students as the subject of the research. There is significant difference in students' vocabulary mastery between students who are taught by using random card games and students who are taught by using conventional ones. The students who are taught by random card games have a good vocabulary and who are taught by using the conventional one. Next, theoretical framework. The first one is vocabulary. There are definitions of vocabulary. Richards and Rinaldia 2002. Vocabulary is a core component of language proficiency and provides much of the basic for how well learners speak, listen, read, and write. While according to Wilkins, you can say very little with grammar, but you can say almost anything with words. This statement explains the importance of vocabulary in language learning. A great range of vocabulary will be very helpful for the students to build their language skill and help them in communicate with others. Well, the next is kinds of vocabulary. Ebersol and Field classified vocabulary into two categories. There are receptive and productive vocabulary. Receptive vocabulary was known as the vocabulary that the learners knew, but they didn't use it when they speak or write. Vocabulary that the learners use in speaking and write is known as productive vocabulary. In harmony with Ebersol and Field, phrase divided vocabulary into two kinds, namely function words and content words. The function words include auxiliary, prepositions, and conjunction. The content words, on the other hand, fall into three categories: nouns, verbs, adjective, and verb. The next is definition of games. A game is one of the techniques used by teachers in teaching vocabulary. The teachers use game as creative and communicative technique, especially in teaching vocabulary. Teachers need to plan games they will use in the classroom that can make their students enjoying, convening, comfortable, and interested in learning vocabulary. Wallen states the aims of vocabulary games and exercise are to develop students' vocabulary and practicing it through games in enjoyable activity. The next is types of vocabulary. There are some types of games for language learners from Wakes et al. 2006. They are car and share, do, move, mime, draw, obey, identify, discriminate, guess, speculate, describe, connect, there are compare, match, and group, order, remember, and the last is create. Well, the next is the advantage and disadvantage of games in the classroom. According to Jerotijevi, states several disadvantages of using games in the class. There are four. Number one, discipline issues. Learners might get excessively noisy. Number two, straying away from the basic purpose of the gameplay activity due to inadequate rules. Number three, if games already familiar, students might not get equally involved. Nonetheless, some learners, especially teenagers, might find games are unnecessary and childish. Next, teaching vocabulary using card games. Teaching vocabulary by using card games is an effective way to reduce the monotony of drilling and learning vocabulary. Card games are a good alternative way in teaching vocabulary. Most of the students love to play games. With the use of card games, the students could practice using vocabulary they have learned and communicate it with their friends. Teachers could make card games with a set of pictures printed on it. The pictures itself can be gathered from books, magazines, newspaper, even from internet. And the teacher can also use the printed or photocopied card games from a book. Well, there are steps in using card games. There are 3 steps in teaching vocabulary using games. The first step is introducing the lesson to students. The second step is introducing the new words that will be played by students. And the last is teacher begins to explain the games that students will play and let students practice the words. Well, the last part in chapter 2 there are hypotheses. The first is alternative hypothesis. There is a significant influence between the use of card games technique and students' achievement in vocabulary. And card games technique can improve students' vocabulary at first grade students of senior high school number 2 Campalagian. And the second one is null hypothesis. There is no significant influence between the use of card games technique and students' achievement in vocabulary. Nonetheless, card games technique cannot improve students' vocabulary ability at first grade students of senior high school number 2 Campalagian. So the last chapter 3, research methods. In chapter 3 there are 5 points. The first is research type and design. The second one is time and location. The third one is population and sample. The fourth one is research instrument. And the last point is data analysis technique. Well, the first one is research type and design. Number 1, research type. The research conducted in quantitative research, which is quasi-experimental because it will be characterized by gathering the information that can be analyzed numerically, the results of which were usually presented using statistics, tables, and graphs. In quasi-experimental method, the researcher looked at 2 groups as the sample. They were experimental group and control group. Number 2, research design. The research design of this researcher was pre-test, post-test control group design. The researcher prepared 2 groups, the control group and the experimental group. Next, the second one is time and location. This research was conducted on September without adapted the schedule of English lesson at first grade of senior high school number 2 Campalagian. And the area of this research was taken place first grade of senior high school number 2 Campalagian in Katumbangan, Subdistrict Campalagian, District of Polewali Mandar, Province West Sulawesi, and through social media. And the third one is population and sample. Number 1, population. Margono 2004. Population is all data that becomes the center of attention of a researcher within the specific scope and time. The researcher focused on students at senior high school to Campalagian, And the population of this research was the first grade science students of senior high school to Champalgian. The total population was 100 students from 4 classes. Number 2. Sample. According to 2006, sample is a part or as a representative of the population being investigated. It means that sample is the smaller part of the population. The participants of this research or the samples were taken using cluster sampling, meaning the technique used if the population doesn't consist of individuals but consists of individual group or cluster. Sugiono 2001. The sampling technique is used to determine the sample when the object to be studied or the data source is very large. In 4 classes, the researchers chose the first grade students of senior high school to Champalagian as the sample of this research. 5 groups of the population samples were taken by cluster sampling. 10 MIPA, there are as 16 students, and the experimental group, and 10 MIPA 16 students as the control group. Well, the part 1 is research instrument. And in this research, the researchers was test and documentation as the instrument. The first is test. Collect the research data about students. Achievement can be done using test instrument. According to the JAMRI 2008, the test is one way to estimate the size of person's ability indirectly, namely through one's response to stimuli or questions. Number 2 is documentation. Besides use those main instruments, the researcher was also used supplementary instruments, the support to the research to get more complete data. So the last point is data analysis technique. This research will use an applications to analyze the data. SPSS is a tool used to help researchers process, analyze, and data. While as data they have, understanding the data owned by researchers is very important because it will relate it when inputting data in SPSS. In quantitative research or in the SPSS, data processing process, the data to be processed. Well, I think that's all for me about my result proposal. Thank you for your nice attention, and I do apologize if I make some mistakes. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh.